Hi there, it's Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder here with this week's episode of the Market Monday. Before we get into the Market Monday, I do want to bring some attention to the $2,000 fantasy finance portfolio that I have going on at my second channel, the Rogue Market. If you haven't subscribed to the Rogue Market and you are a fan of the Market Mondays, I highly suggest doing so. That is where I have a channel that is solely dedicated towards MTG finance. We are keeping the Market Monday on this channel as it is kind of iconic for this channel. It's where it started, and it actually predates the creation of the Rogue Market channel. So I'll keep it here, but if you want more meat, definitely go check the Rogue Market channel. So in celebration of the 2,000 subscribers, I thought it'd be fun to do a $2,000 fantasy finance portfolio. So how this works is you're going to go sign up for an account over at EchoMTG. I am not affiliated, sponsored, anything with the web service. This was actually something that was recommended by a patron that they use to track their portfolio. So we actually checked it out and it does the job. So this is going to allow you to create a $2,000 fantasy. You don't have to own these cards. So you're going to make if you're already using EchoMTG, you can just make a new binder for this particular competition and fill it full of $2,000 worth of cards. The submissions are due. You need to take a screenshot once it's at the 2,000, once you lock in your 2,000, so that we know that it was worth that on that day that you're submitting the submission. And then you have till the end of the March to finalize that. And then at the 1st of June, we are going to declare the winner. So the person's collection that goes up the most from the $2,000 will be declared the winner, and I'm going to give away my ad revenue from YouTube, which ended up being about a box of Battle Bond, is how much I made all the way from 0 to 2,000. Get that good YouTube money there. Pretty pathetic, I know, but it's a good way to give back for all the supporters. So if you want more about this competition, just go and check out roguedeckbuilder.com. It's on the front page there, and it will give you some suggestions on how to get started with EchoMTG. I think we're up to about 40 submissions right now, so it should be a pretty fun competition. If you're into this sort of thing, I highly encourage you to participate. Remember, you only have till the end of March, so get those submissions in. Alrighty, so today, of course, we are going to be talking about the Challenger decks. So we finally have the Challenger decks spoiled a month later than they were the year before. And these are the Challenger decks from last year. So let's just take a look at the Challenger decks from this year. I've got them pulled up on Goldfish, and people are very disappointed. I've heard a lot of people murmuring, and it's funny because everyone loved them the last time around, and I hated them. And then this time around, it's kind of swapped. I do think a couple of these, especially the white one and the green-black ones, are extremely pathetic, and they are still violating the problems that I had with the first Challenger decks. However, at least we have some silver lining with these Challenger decks that we did not have with last year. So instead of going right into those, let's do a little bit of a compare-contrast. When these deck lists from 2018 came out, there was about $100 worth of values when the decks were spoiled. And right now there is roughly the same, I would say about, probably 10-20% less in value. And the biggest thing that I've noticed from the Challenger decks from last year and the Challenger decks from right now is the prices are crashing from these Challenger decks a lot quicker than the prices crashed from the previous year's Challenger decks. And I think it's due to mainly we know how much supply will be there for these particular Challenger decks. There are still tons of supply available for Challenger decks 2018. I'm sure I'm going to revisit them in a few years when they're out of sight, out of mind, and there might be some arbitrage moments where you can actually buy up some of these Challenger decks and actually make a profit if the distributors actually lower the cost of these. But that's another topic for another day. So last time around, these actually stubbornly maintained their value for quite a while until about release. So there wasn't a crash in the market when the decks were spoiled. This time around, though, there has been a crash of the market as soon as it dropped. It dropped this morning. I've been waiting to get this Market Monday out, and even in that time period, they've dropped significantly. If you actually go look at TCG mid versus TCG low, the prices have really gone down from where they were this morning. So again, let's just take a look at the Challenger decks from last year and why I hated them so much. We had the Hazard Aggro, which included basically no cards that were going to have any sort of equity post-rotation. We had Lightning Strikes, and that's about it from the Fanatical Firebrand and Lightning Strikes, for example, and everything else just had the just completely rotted from rotation. You did have some cards that could hold a little bit of value, like Chandra and Hazoret, because they do see play in other formats, but not that much. And this is the deck that everyone just ranted and raved about as being such an awesome deck to bring to Standard, because it was a tier deck at the time, and it included 2 expensive cards in the form of Chandra, Torch of Defiance, and it also included the Hazoret the Fervent, and it was a pretty good deck. Not a lot of upgrades were required to make this deck actually legit. Then people liked the Vehicle Rush because it gave some lands in the form of Concealed Courtyard and Inspiring Vantage. We did have some things that did survive post-rotation, like the Dragon Soul Summit and the Unclaimed Territories, but overall there was not a lot of cards that also were able to go and have any value post-rotation. So I had huge criticism of these 2 decks, and these 2 decks by far were the ones that were most well received. Then we had Second Sun Control, the one that was the least favorable, the least had the less of a positive reception, but this one actually did have the most going for it post-rotation. We had 2 Field of Ruins, as well as the Settle the Wreckage, which was still dismal and pitiful for cards that actually survived post-rotation. And last but not least, we had the Counter Surge, probably actually last but least. There was a whopping really nothing that survived post-rotation in this one either. They didn't even give the dual lands. I don't think they existed at this point, though, because it was Dominaria, and I think these deck lists came out before Dominaria, I believe. I don't know. I have to double check those. But again, a lot of these cards just absolutely got crushed, but at least you got like a walking ballista that had modern play out of this. So this was my initial criticism of the decks. People misinterpreted my criticism of the deck. Oh man, did that cause a stink when I was the only person based in the Magic community saying that these were just disingenuous products. And if Wizards really wanted to give us a gift, they would give us things that survived. That these, I just knew as a local game store owner that I had a really the shelf life of this, the window of being able to sell these was incredibly short, and especially when they released them in April, when the Standard season is already coming to a close. There is going to be another set that is released, actually, 2 sets that are released in Standard, but still, this is the time period that all vendors are already starting to try to get rid of these type of cards. So the price inevitably starts to fall to where their budget to begin with. And then when you dump a ton of supply on top of that, it just leads to a feel bad in the form of people that actually end up buying these later on and then not have enough time to actually play around with these. And of course, I have so many people like, well, I bought them and it was really fun for the 4 weeks that I played it. Sure, okay, if that works for you, it works for you. But the vast majority of, they could have done that with a product that actually survived post-rotation, and then these could be actually good sellers and actually help alleviate the price of the format post-rotation. That was my entire point, and people just could not get it to save their lives of why I was kind of irate about the choices that went into these particular deck list. So anyway, that was last year's, and you can see that there was very little of these decks that actually survived post-rotation. So let's take a look at this time around. The first one is white. This is definitely the one that is going to be the least well received. Kind of surprising they didn't go out with a 4 history of Benalius. So the thing is with this, you can definitely see a certain time period that they made these decks. And the last time around, they kind of got lucky with the Hazoret aggro deck still remaining tier all the way until it was published. Unfortunately for mono white, it's fallen out of favor quite substantially, I would say. It definitely doesn't have the showing that it had at the Pro Tour when these were designed. And a lot of the cards, too, have started to lose a lot of value just because Dominaria was open like crazy, so it was hard for that set to retain value. And then couple with the fact that, this deck has lost favor, that it has crashed from the time period it probably was designed. I am assuming that this one was designed when History of Banality was a $25 card, and so that way you can make up the value of this, why this deck is priced a lot less than the rest of them, if that you could see there was $100 when they designed this in the form of History of Benalia. Unfortunately for them, History of Benalia was about the dullest reprint for the Challenger decks, especially when they went ahead and spoiled a Johnny's Pride Meet a few months ago that it was going to be in a deck list. That basically was meaning that the Mythic this time, the Chase Mythic, was going to be History of Benalia, and a lot of people sold their History of Benalias before the Challenger decks, like we did, for example. And that's already caused the price to crash on History of Benalia. And like I said before, couple that with the fact that this deck has just fallen out of favor, and you get the perfect storm for this deck. So this deck is currently at $61.94. You add everything up, but if you actually look at these cards, many of these cards are basically not worth anything. A Donto Vanguard can already be found plenty vendors for a quarter. It was already trending down, same thing with Skymarch Aspirant. So this is not a representative of the market price or even the mid. I mean, there's just so many cards that are stuck there that people haven't taken off. The cards that are selling are definitely not around this. Cards like Binless Marshall, I believe this already had a different printing before in subsequent products, and Pride of Conquerors has been replaced since this deck has been with the, what is the Undaunted... I can't charge, or what is the one that makes them indestructible and +1/+1 counter on them? Most decks are preferring to run that over Pride of Conquerors. So this deck is already reeling from devaluation, and on top of that now, it decided to go kind of weak on the amount of cards that it printed in here, with just a 2 of Legion's Landing and a 2 of History of Benalia. They might have made this a lot more impressive if it included 4 of both. If you look at this too, this has virtually no rotation equity. You have Legion's Landing that does see some modern play, and other than that, I mean, Tecatli Honor Guard sees some play in some Taxes decks, and you have some four of Conclave Tribunals that survive rotation. So that's the value you get from this poor deck. The rest of it, Remorseful Cleric, I guess, does see some modern play, but the rest of this, though, is not going to have much value in the long term. Binless Marshall is even awkward for commander decks because of the triple. Again, it's just not going to be that highly sought after. Then we have the next one, which is the red deck. So they do red 2 years in a row. And this one, too, is very, very weird because I think they were priced on Runaway Steamkins being very expensive, Experimental Frenzies being very expensive at the time of this deck. And they didn't they didn't try to recognize that recent sets always just naturally crash the value of cards. So the Runaway Steamkins, I think, were $5 when this deck was thought up, and Experimental Frenzies also were like $5-6. Those have gone completely down in value as, you know, just the supply of Guilds of Ravnica has hit its peak, and they decided to cut the Rekindling Phoenixes as a result. So this one also is a deck that is lacking. However, this deck has probably the most, well, not the most, but it's the second most of the equity that actually does transfer over. And it actually does give a little bit of a baseline for a deck, with the next rotation coming out with 4 Runaway Steamkins and Experimental Frenzy most likely still being able to fare quite well with like Light Up the Stage and the Skewer. So at least you'll have some cards. If you bought this deck and played mono red throughout the rest of the season, you could probably transition this into a mono red deck in the next standard format. It's most definitely going to be there. It seems like that at least the past, all the way back, even I'd say even a Return to Ravnica has had some sort of mono red strategy that's been viable. So, unfortunately, a bunch of these cards don't have any modern play, like the Goblin Chain Whirler hasn't really seen much play, if any at all. The Get You Lava Runner does. There are some decent little popper cards in here, but none of them really hold their value. The Lava Coil is a nice boon that does have some equity that passes over. And of course, the Experimental Frenzy and the Runaway Steamkin, those ones will be good for this particular deck. I don't think it will ever be able to make up the value unless Runaway Steamkin goes back up in value for this deck to actually be purchased at its SRP and cracked, or at least its distributor price and cracked, and being able to piece this out for profit. So this one's going to decay very, very quickly. All right, so on to the next one. This is another one I can't stand. It also is another one that this sort of cards right here are going to get crushed. The Merfolk Branchwalker is definitely not representative of where this card is going to go. They're going to go back down to a quarter a piece. Even has like cards like District Guide that when they printed this were pretty good slots, but have fallen out of favor for that slot. There are some, I think the silver lining in this is just commander cards like Plague Crafter, the Golgari Finebroker, and Ravenous Chupacabra will see a lot of play in commander for years to come. They even decided to go Vraska Relic Seeker over the Vraska out of Guilds of Ravnica. This is another thing that goes to show, I think Vraska was like a $15 card when these decks were created, and it is another card that has lost its slot to the Hydroid Krasis and other cards. Vivian is another one. I think when they made these decks too, people were running a split of Vivians and Vraskas, and Vraska saw a lot more play in these original decks that saw the early Pro Tour finishes and Grand Prix finishes. And then as the season stretched on towards Ravnica Legions, Vraska saw less and less and less play, and everyone was running Vivian over Vraska, as it was a great way to kill Drakes and other, Lyras and other flyers. So this was a miss on Vraska. They should have gone Vivian, and it would have been at least a better buy for this particular deck. This one falls very flat. The worst thing about this deck, too, is like I said, there's not a lot of rotation equity here. The Fine Finalities are good. This is a card that surprised me that it hasn't gone up more. However, I think this is going to be the kind of nail in the coffin for this card to be ever really gain any sort of significant value. Cards like Cast Down, too, don't have a lot of play outside of Standard. Eldritch Reborn's kind of nice in the Commander, but again, you kind of go down this list too. A lot of these cards don't really have any other play. Golden Demise has already been kicked out of its slot for Cry of Contrition, and the deck just doesn't seem to be very well positioned as it is. It requires a ton of money investment to actually upgrade this deck to where it needs to be. I mean, it'll probably do okay out the gates. It's got its nice little shell of the Merfolk Branchwalker, Seeker Squire, Wild Growth Walker. That always does well versus the mono red, mono white decks. However, again, how the meta has evolved since the time of this deck, it's gone more into like Hydroid Crasises, which are going to be very expensive, which I'm going to talk about later as we go on. We're going to look at the upgraded version of these decks and decide, will there be room for players to want to buy these as a starter and then upgrade them? Because we did see a slight increase in the value of some of these cards. Like, what was the Hazard Aggro? We saw Earthshaker Kenra go up a little bit because it was not included in this particular deck, so people wanted to upgrade their Hazard Aggro, and I think we did see that with some of these other decks too, the upgrade versions. Unfortunately for some of these Challenger decks, many of them actually fell out of favor when they actually did come out. Like, this is the big one that still did see play in Standard. So let's go on to definitely last but definitely not least. This is the shining star. If they could have created decks that were like this Phoenix deck, I think that this would have been a knockout of the park, and I wouldn't give them such bad ratings because it does actually have some reprint equity or some rotation equity included in this, and I think there just wasn't another option. It was hard for them to build a fourth deck when a little bit of humble brag right now. If you do know, when we did the Challenger Decks predictions, I did call all four of these archetypes. To me, it seemed like a pretty much duh. These are the more, if you were to create four that didn't have a lot of overlap, it would be mono white, mono red, some sort of Drake variant, and green black Explorer. A lot of people are like, well, what about mono blue? Well, when mono blue was in the meta, it was a budget deck. It was like $30, $40. There was no way they could get enough value by creating a Challenger decks with mono blue, and it wasn't just an option just because they were worried about the price point. And all the other price points, like if you were going to Teferi, it'd require way more than they wanted to put in something like Challenger decks. So it left it down to these four archetypes that they could reasonably make a deck list. So if we look over this one, this is trying to be a half-seas deck. It's more on the control end of things with Murmuring Mystics and Nimizettes. The Crackling Drakes are still in here, and a one of Arclight Phoenix is definitely out of place because usually if you run Arclight Phoenix, you're going to be running a full playset of them. So Arclight Phoenix might have what we call the Tarmogoyf effect. The Tarmogoyf effect is something I like to talk about. When Modern Masters 1 came out, the reprinting of Tarmogoyf actually made the card go up in value. And the reason was people were cracking Modern Masters 1, cracking a Tarmogoyf, and then thinking, well, I might as well finish off my playset. Or it really wanted them to make a Tarmogoyf deck. And so it led to actually more purchases of Tarmogoyf, which outstretched the measly supply of Modern Masters 1. Now, this isn't measly supply, but it is just a one of in the deck. So I'm thinking if any card can hold its value the greatest out of the cards that are printed in this in these Challenger decks, it is Arclight Phoenix, and it might have that effect. What it also has going for this is the deck that has the most pieces in it post-rotation. If you actually look at this entire thing is post-rotation. This is all Guilds of Ravnica here, which is very different from the other decks. If you even go down here, Guilds of Ravnica, Guilds of Ravnica, Guilds of Ravnica. Shock probably will get reprinted, or some Storm will go in here, and I'm expecting Opt as well. So there's a few little bits and pieces that do need to be replaced. We do have Discovery of Dispersal that does usually go in Electromancer Phoenix type decks, or if you go into heavier control, you still have the Nimizet, Crackling Drakes that go into those shells, which also have a lot of cards from Guilds of Ravnica that, of course, will require an upgrade, but nevertheless, this archetype is still alive and well. It's still doing quite well. There are some kind of bulky cards in here, like the Mirari Conjecture. But all in all, this is the one that holds most value. Crackling Drakes will continue to probably rise. Well, this will stabilize the price of it. This was a card that was going to rise. It's going to see play post rotation. It's power enough for modern, so it's definitely powerful enough in standard. And the same can be said about Nimazet. And so this again is the kind of the shining star out of the list. Not only that, it has 4 lava coils, which are a $2.50 card before rotation. Actually, I believe occurred in other supplemental products, and lava coil still, the supply was being outstretched by the demand. Funny that Entrancing Melody was actually in here too, when Entrancing Melody wasn't a card worth any significant amount of money when they created these decks. So again, this kind of shows the problem with trying to anticipate challenger decks. The first one was sort of a knockout of the park because the meta was quite stale. A lot of the sets they created after the challenger decks, what came out after that, what was it? The Hour Devastation was already out. So yeah, Dominaria and Core 2019 didn't have a lot of cards that actually affected the meta last time around. And this time around, the meta has seemed to be shaken up quite a bit from the latter end of Guilds of Ravnica and right out the bat with the Ravnica Legions, especially like Hydra Krasis being a card. So if we actually look over the meta, this can kind of give us a look at cards that do have the potential of going up just because of being upgrades to challenger decks. So first of all, let's look at the Sultai midrange. This one, if you're thinking that people are going to upgrade it, my targets for this one would definitely be the cards like the Drowned Catacomb did not see a reprint. It doesn't require a lot of them. It doesn't look like some of these decks are running more of these type of cards. Some are running less. This one is going all out on Shocklands and Woodland Cemetery. I believe we had Woodland Cemetery in the 2 Woodland Cemeteries. So that is the supply is going to be met by the challenger decks, and the subsequent cards get flooded back in because of the challenger decks. So the Shocklands do look quite promising for this one as potential investments of Overgrown Tombs, especially Breeding Pools, Water Graves next in line of being upgrades that are kind of necessary for this deck to function. Of course, people can just upgrade just to black-green, and so that's where I'm really looking at Overgrown Tomb as a card that has the most potential of going up and maybe going the route of something like Breeding Pool and having a lot more value to its name. It's kind of surprising right now that Breeding Pool is worth substantially more than the Overgrown Tomb. We have $675 and $1195 respectively. So I'm thinking that this is going to approach what Breeding Pool is going at right now. The other cards that have a potential of going up for upgrades, of course, is Hydroid Krasis. This could end the Hydroid Krasis going down in value, and it could start creeping back up. I could see people wanting to pick up Carnage Tyrants. However, these decks haven't been a must with Carnage Tyrant. The deck lists, though, are pretty much in agreement that Vivian wants to be in this deck. So Vivian could be something that goes up in value short term because of the challenger decks, and same thing with something like Vraska's Contempt. However, I do advise you against going all in on these cards because the window to be able to invest and then sell these cards is quite low. And I think that unless you're really thinking of doing a quick flip, which you don't know when that opportune time is going to happen, when these are going to hit their peak, that's really rough. So I don't know. I'd advise against investing in cards that go in this deck, except for ones that have any sort of reprint equity like the Overgrown Tomb. So that'd be my pick for this particular deck list. Cry of the Carnarium could be a close second. It's an uncommon I think is undervalued. But, I mean, these are hard to move. You have to find buy lists that pay more than what you paid for them, which can be a lot of times just not reasonable. And, I'd move against investing in this particular deck. So if we go back to the metagame here, the next would be this Bant Aggro, I think is just White Weenie. Yeah, I don't know why they're calling this Bant Aggro. I think the Bant Aggro is a different deck. This one's just got misnamed here. So this is what people are running at the moment. A lot of them are running blue in the sideboard. Tithe Taker is the big one that stands out here. Most of these decks do run Tithe Taker in this place, and there of course wasn't any as this is Ravnica Allegiance. This one could go up. I think a lot of these Ravnica Allegiance cards are still quite inflated though. However, there's not a lot of room for anything else to go up in this deck. History Banality will be sufficed by the challenger decks. You could say maybe Glacial Fortress and Hallowed Fountains, but Mono White is quite easy. If people are just going to be playing this at an F&M level, they might not want to go the full bring in the blue package just for negating the sideboard, which is really what this deck does. So again, not a lot of opportunity here. Maybe Tithe Taker, that would be the card that I'd look at for these challenger decks. It could be the budget deck of choice. And if we actually go back and look at something like Mono Blue Tempo, these cards were very, very inexpensive until the budgetness took over and it became legit. So this is kind of the rise of, it went from about $2. This is a bad example because Siren Stormsaber was a lot of people thinking that it was modern Wizards was going to take off, and so the value of it went up. But if you look like Tempest, budget card here, boom, goes up in value. It even did it right here as well. So budget card went up in value because it was the budget deck of choice playing mono blue. So mono white could actually surpass mono blue for the budget deck of choice, and some of those cards that are not contained in the challenger deck could go up, and Tide Taker is really the only one at that point that I think has the opportunity to do so. The next deck would be the mono red, which is still everywhere in Arena. It shows the bias that Arena has, the shuffler, where mono red is such a legit deck but barely even registers on legit shuffler. Let's go and look at like the Rakdos aggro. That's the closest thing here. Cards like the Rixmati Reveler could go up in value. They don't have to go the black route though. Rekindling Phoenix will still go down. I think it's enough supply that's being injected in by the challenger decks. But the big ones here is Light Up the Stage. Light Up the Stage is already quite expensive for an uncommon, and this is one that's going to be needed in these decks. So we could actually see like $3-4 Light Up the Stages because of challenger decks. I think this one is actually a pretty safe investment for just challenger decks in general, as these have to go in this deck. I don't think there will be any iteration of this deck that is not going to use Light Up the Stage. Skewer, not so much. I think usually Runaway Steamkin decks do like Skewer, but you can see this deck, it's absolutely not a must. This one has chosen not to go Skewers. Let's look at some other lists just to get second opinions here. This one does have Skewer in this list and Light Up the Stage, but I don't think there's any decks that don't run Light Up the Stage as a 4 of. It's solidified its spot. Dragsoul Summit and Blood Crypt are a little bit more awkward because, like I said, I don't know at the FNN level if these challenger decks are going to translate in people really caring about splashing for the Rixmati Reveler. So we'll have to wait and see for that. So this one, that'd be my pick, is Light Up the Stage, and I do think that's the safest one so far that we've talked about. If we go over to last but not least one with the Is It Phoenix, these decks can be built are very different ways. There's the Phoenix way that is starting to get a resurgence in popularity with the Arclight Phoenix. Crackling Drake's Electromagic is already in there. You could see Ral Is It Viceroy go up because it is required as usually one of in the main and one of in the sideboard. The card that I do like is Discovery Dispersal. I think post-rotation has the best chance to overtake Chart a Course or be the replacement for Chart a Course. You do get the Lava Coils, not a lot of other stuff here. Possibly the Steam Vents. Steam Vents would be a great one to sink some money into if you're thinking that Guilds of Ravnica is done being opened and people are going to upgrade their challenger decks. Now let's see if we can find another type of deck. Let's see if we can find one that is just going in the Enigma Drake. I'm gonna search for Enigma Drake because it's hard to find list. But the Drake decks are weird. Sometimes they go into Phoenixes. That's the card that will be the popularity of the week, and then people go back over into Enigma Drake. So see if I can find a Jessica. That one will be definitely more. So this one's over into a Deafening Clarion list. That is a card that could definitely go up, or Justice Strike for people updating the deck. I'm even interested in expansion to Explosion. A lot of lists do run those in the Drake decks, but you can see the Enigma Drake could see some temporary value gain because of the challenger decks then upgrading towards the Enigma Drake. But as you saw with the Phoenixes, that's not a must. People can definitely, since they have the Phoenix, be more geared toward going into that Phoenix list because it seems to be easier to upgrade into that. So that'd be my pick, is definitely looking at Ral Is It Viceroy for the card that has the most potential to go up from the challenger decks. So basically that's the overview of the challenger decks. Not too impressed this year. I think people are starting to get what I was talking about. There's a lot more murmuring, and it's because the market has adjusted a lot quicker than we saw with the market last time around, where it actually even took a week or two after the release of the challenger decks for these prices to crash. I was very surprised at how well these maintained their value. And a lot of people said that there was a resurgence of standard, or at least the FNM level, because of the challenger decks, and that could be it. And right now we're a pretty vibrant and healthy scene for standard, so I don't know if challenger decks are going to be able to increase something that's already at capacity, for example. So again, we'll have to wait and see how these affect the market. Last but not least, I do want to draw some attention to the overall health of the game. And this one is, I think that if you go over here to movers and shakers, this is a huge sign of one format in particular that is taking off. And not because I clicked on the modern here. Commander staples. So we're talking about the tier of the tier of the tier are going nuts. So look at cards like Paradox Engine and Rings of Brighthearth just going crazy in value. I need to really bust out the Rogue Roundup over at the Rogue Market. I've got a good pick for Commander that I think is going to have a double up because the supply is quite low. Many of these cards are falling. You can actually see Moderns exploding too. That has mainly to do with Modern Horizon. The duck cards are going up in value, but Commander is the one that was surprising. Usually Commander does start to gain in popularity around midsummer. This is quite early for Commander cards to be going crazy. Tax returns are starting to roll in, so people are starting to get those Commander pieces they never could afford and jamming in their decks. But we'll have to do a whole entire video. Definitely go check out my second channel with the Rogue Market of just assessing Commander. But I think that these two on top, and you're seeing a few cards every day start to go on top, is a huge indicator that the entire Commander format is about to have a huge explosion in the prices of many of these artifacts. I think lands are next to come that have a lot of overlap between many different commanders. So Rings of Brighthearth is an incredibly versatile card. I have it in many commander decks, and Paradox Engine needs to be banned. I mean, they need to get rid of this card in Commander. It is just absolutely oppressive. That's my my spiel with that card. But again, we'll have to do an overall sense of the game. In my assessment, it's incredibly positive. There are a lot of amazing deals to be had. One of the things I need to talk about in a future episode is what's called the spread between buy lists and sell lists. There are some very aggressive spreads right now, almost non-existent spreads between many commander staples and how much vendors like Card Kingdom are paying for those particular cards. So I'm going to do an entire episode dedicated towards that, and maybe we can find some good specs. A lot of people have asked for a live Q&A for talking about how I invest in cards. If I do that, it'll probably be on my second channel. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video for the Market Monday. Be careful out there with rotating cards for the challenger decks. If you want a quick little increase, you really need to be glued to your screen to know when that cards have gone up to their absolute. As soon as you see any of those cards that are rotating go up in value and then start to dip, that is when you need to sell them ASAP. And for me, I don't think there's enough window. It's too risky for my blood before rotation inevitably starts to kill the value of cards that don't have any sort of play outside of standard. And those are cards I would invest in. But the ones that are rotating, I think there are some good opportunities. Anyway, this has been Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.